Hello. Hello and welcome everyone to the Center for Spiritual Living located in San Clemente, California. And here is Reverend Heather Dawn Clark.
Dr. Heather Dawn Clark. Thank you,
I'm new at
Derek.
this.
I just wanted to say welcome to our community, to our center, and to set consciousness, because when I was approached about this by Charles and Darren, they said, you know, we know that we need a spiritual solution. And I thought, yes, I want to be part of a spiritual solution to something that is a horrendous problem, to be able to see it clearly and right, so that we can take appropriate action. So if you'll just join me in consciousness, I'm going to briefly set the intention for the afternoon, and then I'm going to turn it over to Gene Stone, who attends often, but he's a native elder, and he's going to set with his form of prayer. And then we have the wonderful gift of having the crystal bowls and having that deepening to take us deeper, deeper, deeper into consciousness. So this is what I know is true. If we would just join together.
Thank you.
If it feels right for you to close your eyes, that's fine. If not, just stay wherever you are. And in this holy moment of right now, what I recognize and know is that there's only one power, known by many names, and that power is everywhere present, and it's all power. It's the power of life itself. It is the creative process, both in the individual and in the universal. And it is everywhere present. Knowing that this is so, what I know is that something wonderful is happening here today. It's happening by means of each one of us, by means of this time together, by means of information, and by means of a deepening spiritual awareness. So knowing that that is our collective intention, I know it is our experience, and it's good and very good. I give great thanks for that one power. I give great thanks for each one here who is an expression of that one power. And with my heart filled with gratitude, I trust the process of that divine mind right here, in and through and by us, with gratitude and appreciation. I release this word to the law of mind, and we anchor it by saying, and so it is. And now, Gene Stone.
I'd like to welcome everyone here. This land is the land of the Hashman people who are native to this land. And I want to first check to see if there's anybody here from the Hashman nation. So in our way, we would let the people of this land speak first. Nobody's here? So I'll say a prayer. I will face the east. And so please forgive me for turning my back. Grandfather, grandmother, greatest of all spirits, great mystery. Grandfather, we ask you to join us today in a good way, and we call upon the spirits of the east to come and join us. We call upon the spirits of the south to come and join us in a good way. And we call upon the spirits of the west to come and join us in a good way. And we call upon the spirits of the north to come and join us in a good way. Grandfather, we ask for a spiritual solution to a problem that we have made for ourselves by not being one with our environment. We've created an abundance of toxic waste throughout the world, and many, many tons of it set on our coastline. And there's many good people who are working to find a solution, the best solution. And we ask for your guidance to find that solution. All my relation, aho, matakuya.
Hi, I'm Charles Langley. I'm the Executive Director of Public Watchdogs, and I'd like to introduce you to our dear friend Pantera, who actually organized this event, and she just wanted to say a few words.
Thank you. I really won't take up really any of the important time, but I just wanted to thank everybody who showed today. This is so important, and it means a lot that you were able to really stay present with this, and I do believe we have solutions, and hopefully today will enlighten us more on what that is. But thank you again for showing. And Charles and Nina have been wonderful to bring this together for us. And of course, Robert, yes, as well. So thank you all for coming.
And we're going to start with a sound healing by this beautiful lady, Ajahn Lynn Marillac, who, and the reason we want to do this is because what we're talking about is very distressing and stressful, and we're hoping that we can engage you on a deep learning level without fear, because sometimes when we hear about this stuff, our first reaction is fear, and then it's anger, and then we kind of shut down. And I just want to let you all know there are solutions to this problem, and we're working on the solutions, and if we work together, we will succeed in doing that. And please welcome Lynn Marillac.
Welcome. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank Dr. Heather for beautiful prayer, and has saved me from too many words. And I'd like to just start with sound, because sound is true, it is real, it is authentic. My intention is for healing myself, for others and the planet, and I do so through vibrational instruments, such as what I've brought today. And what we have are gemstone crystal bowls and a gong, and I'll describe that just briefly. The crystal bowls are infused with gemstones, and they have intentions and are very pure. This one is rose quartz. It is infused with rose quartz, which is the love activator. This is the sound of love. My next bowl is grandmother, bringing forth all of the wisdom and unconditional love and support of our grandmothers and their grandmothers. And this is the sound of unconditional love. Like a big hug. The next bowl is Mother of Platinum, and this is the sound of the divine. The fourth gemstone bowl is infused with gold. It's called 24 Ocean Blue. This is the sound of the dolphin essence and the whale intelligence, the stewards of the earth that help us and guide us and send us messages. And this is what it sounds like. You'll hear more of them, but I wanted to introduce you to the star, which is Chiron Gong. Chiron is known as the wounded healer. This is a gong in the planetary series where each gong is tuned to a planet. This gong is the gong of initiation and personal transformation, and it helps us to break through to our most deepest wounds and heals them. You'll know when I play the gong. So I invite you to sit back, relax, breathe deeply, focus on your breath, and let go and ride the vibration. You may close your eyes, keep them open, whatever calls to you. It's all is for our highest good. Healing on the physical, mental, emotional, for your beautiful energy. Thank you, Darren, for the center. Thank you, Dr. Heather, for everything that you do. Thank you, Charles and Nina, for beautiful public watchdog. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pantera, for putting this together. May the infinite light shine upon you. May all love surround you. And may the light guide and heal you. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Lynn Marillac. And thank you, Dr. Clark. And thank you, Jean Stone, for those beautiful prayers, these beautiful blessings. My name is Charles Langley. I'm the Executive Director of Public Watchdogs. And I've been an energy advocate in San Diego, a public energy advocate, since 1996. I invented the world's first crowd-based commodity price tracking index, which was a website that allowed people to look up cheap gasoline prices on the internet back in 1997. And if you look at that stuff on your car or use that, I was the one who started that, and I've been deeply involved in energy issues for many years, especially utility energy issues. And I became involved in San Onofre in 2013 when the steam generators failed, shortly after they failed in 2012 actually at San Onofre. And initially I was concerned about the corruption that went on and the illegal activity. But as I became more deeply involved with it, I met people like our friends Gary and Lori here from San Clemente Green, whose table is out there in the lobby, and really learned about how dangerous this situation is. So I'd just like to get into that, and I'd like you to know that in a few years, in about 18 months, Southern California Edison will have completed construction of what will be the world's largest beachfront nuclear waste dump. This is what failed at San Onofre. And are you telling me I need to speak up louder, Darren? Okay, my apologies. This is you're looking at a replacement steam generator. That isn't the one at San Onofre. This is the one that they actually used at San Onofre. But I wanted you to see how big they are. So you can see the little guys in front there. This is a massive piece of equipment. And when they installed this into the nuclear reactor system at San Onofre, the sole purpose was to generate steam to turn a turbine, which created electricity. And what the engineers at Mitsubishi and Southern California Edison knew was that if they could fit more steam tubes into one of these things, they could generate more electricity, more revenue. And what they did, in order to make room for the steam tubes in these generators, was they removed vital safety equipment. And one of the things they removed was the stabilizing cylinder at the bottom of the steam generator and these things called batwing stabilizers. And those were designed to stop the tubes from banging into each other like a water hammer. I don't know if any of you have ever turned water off in your house really fast, and then in another part of the house you hear this rap, 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 rap. Has anyone ever experienced that? That's a water hammer. That's water traveling, an impulse traveling through water at more than twice the speed of sound, and it's hitting your pipes like a hammer. And this is what was going on at San Onofre, and it's why these steam generators failed. And the reason this is important is that these steam generators were an experimental design that were never approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In my opinion, this was a criminal activity that's never been prosecuted. And with that, I'm going to stop talking about corruption and just explain what's going on. The first canister of fuel was loaded a few days ago into what's called the ISFC, the Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation. They'd originally scheduled it for December 2017. They're finally on track right now, and I believe they delayed the offloading of this material because they just announced a huge settlement involving the financial fraud that happened at San Onofre, and they wanted to dilute the media value of the fact that they just moved this first of 72 cans of nuclear waste. Now, what you're looking at here is a picture of a nuclear fuel assembly. The item on the right is a fuel rod. The assemblies are made of fuel rods. They're all bundled together, and these fuel bundles are assemblies. And they, right now, are being stored in a pool. And if you look at the bottom of this pool, you can see the square grids, and that's where the fuel assemblies are dropped into, like a little basket in there. These pools are cooled and chilled constantly because the temperature in the pool can get very, very high. This is hot nuclear waste. It can reach 1,000 degrees very quickly if it isn't cooled. Now, this is what they're putting it into in what they call dry storage. And you're looking at the top of what is essentially a nuclear trash can. And you can see that same grid pattern. That's the basket that's going to hold the fuel assemblies I just showed you. And then to the right, you can see what the can looks like once it's sealed. They weld it shut. It's hermetically sealed. They fill it with helium because it's an inert, non-flammable gas. And then the thing cools itself through what's called passive air cooling. But it's still very hot fuel. You know, you could easily fry a steak on the outside of one of these cans. Now, this is what one of the cans looks like laying on its side. They're actually about 25 feet high. And this is an actual can. I photographed it in the San Onofre parking lot. And just to give you an idea of scale, the bottom of the can, you can see there's a pallet below there. So it's about 4.5 feet by 4.5 feet. And then it's manufactured by a company called Holtec. Now, once they put these things in the ground, they go into what is essentially a concrete mausoleum. There are 75 silos that are going to hold this nuclear waste. And you can see a cutaway view of what one of these looks like. And it looks very sanitary, but there's actually dirt, not solid concrete, in the actual mausoleum. And this is what it looked like when it was under construction. What you're looking at are 75 stainless steel silos that are going to hold these stainless steel nuclear trash cans. And what I'd like to point out is that this facility is literally 108 feet away from the beach. You can see the seawall to the right and then the ocean behind it. This is what it looks like now. They've covered it up. There's a 2 feet concrete pad on the top and a several foot concrete pad below. Each of the silos has got concrete encasing it, but it's dirt in between each of the silos. And then they've got about a 2-ton capstone on top of there. And they remove that, and then they drop the nuclear waste in the can into each one of those silos. Now, the reason this is so important to understand why they're going to such security measures is each one of these cans actually contains more radiation than what was released in the entire Chernobyl disaster. There's going to be 72 of these cans in this facility. And to give you, I guess to put it in another way, they're filled with plutonium and uranium. And a pound of plutonium, if it was evenly distributed over the entire planet, would be enough to give everyone cancer. It'd be very hard to distribute a pound of plutonium over the entire planet, but it's still that it's widely considered to be the deadliest stuff on Earth. The plutonium is deadly for 250,000 years. But there's a local group here called San Onofre Safety that checked into the quality of these cans. And Donna Gilmore of San Onofre Safety, right here in San Clemente, she hired her own attorneys at her own expense. They submitted documents to Southern California Edison, and they said, well, how long are these cans guaranteed for? And the answer came back, they're only guaranteed to last 25 years. And the system, this concrete structure you're looking at, is only guaranteed to last 10 years. And that's because it's on top of an earthquake fault line and in a tsunami zone, which we're going to talk about in a minute when our geologist gets up here, Robert Pope. Now the cans are moved with these giant, massive tractors. And this isn't one of the tractors at San Onofre, but it gives you an idea of how they work. And they move these things very, very slowly. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is very concerned if one of these canisters dropped a couple of inches that it could crack open. If the canister cracks open, it's going to release millions of curies of radiation. And so it's a real danger to everyone. The other problem with a cracked canister is that the helium inside would leak out, and then a chemical reaction would occur inside the fuel assemblies where there would be hydrogen off-gassing. Now, most of you know that hydrogen's highly flammable, and when you've got hot nuclear waste and hydrogen, it's not necessarily a good combination. So our concern is that that particular type of event could create what's called a criticality event. And a criticality event is just another nice way of saying a meltdown when it's in one of these nuclear garbage cans. Now, this is the view from the very top of the facility. And you can see how it's 108 feet from the beach. And this is just from Google Earth. It's not like a top secret satellite image. This is what I see when I look at it. I see eggs, okay? Now here's one. We asked a man named Ace Hoffman, who designs slide rulers, he's really a math geek, to do some proportional mathematics. And the walls on these cans are about 5/8 of an inch thick. That's about the diameter of a dime. And if you were to shrink them down to the size of an egg, that egg would weigh many, many pounds, and the stainless steel on the outside of the egg would be about as thick as an eggshell. Actually, it would be slightly thinner than what the US government considers to be a healthy eggshell. It's a stainless steel eggshell, but it's still a very heavy egg. And these canisters can weigh hundreds of thousands of pounds. So just to summarize, where are they going? They're going 108 feet from the beach. They're in a tsunami zone on top of an earthquake fault. And I keep meaning to fix this slide. There's not 50 million people in the 50-mile plume zone. There are 8.5 million people within the 50-mile plume zone. Right now in San Clemente, we're within the 10-mile plume zone for San Onofre. Now, there was a settlement to move the nuclear waste. And when people heard about this, they all breathed a huge sigh of relief and thought, oh great, we're going to move this nuclear waste. Well, it doesn't move the waste. It's a framework for moving the waste if they ever figure out a better place to put it than when it's on the beach. And I won't get into the details of it, but the facts are this settlement does not move the waste, will not move the waste. The waste is being buried on the beach, and we need to be aware and conscious that this is going on. The chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, former chairman named Gregory Yatsko, is this man shown in the photo, and he said that this settlement was actually a recipe for sustained failure. So I won't get into the details of the settlement. So Public Watchdogs, that's our group, is suing the Department of Defense, the US Navy, and Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric, which owns 20% of this facility, in federal court. And we intend to revoke this permit. They have started burying the waste, dropping it into those silos now. It is our intent to force them to pull it back out and put it back into the spent fuel pools where we believe it is safer. Now, a lot of very prominent people have said, we've got to get it out of the spent fuel pools because it's dangerous in there. But the reality is that had San Onofre remained operating, those pools would have held that nuclear waste for another 40 years. So we see this effort to get rid of it and put it on the beach as something that's a bit of a false level of urgency. We don't have to come up with a solution immediately tomorrow. And just to summarize what our lawsuit's all about is we're saying that the Girl Scouts of America under federal law have no more authority to issue a nuclear waste dump permit than you or I or the Coastal Commission, which curiously enough issued a permit to bury the nuclear waste on the beach. I just want to leave you with some solutions. We believe the best solution is to put this in more robust, thick-walled containers. A typical dry cask has a wall that's 20 inches thick, usually made from ductile cast iron. We want cans that are inspectable and movable, and we want them in a geologically stable location. So that's my share of the presentation, and Darren, if you could load Robert Pope's, I'd be very grateful.
I have one question about
Yes, ma'am.
one thing you said. What is the reason for not keeping them in the pools? What is the rationale behind not leaving them in the pools?
Okay, we'll if we could hold questions until the end, but the reason for not keeping it in the pools is basically that it limits Edison's liability on this. Once they get it onto the beach, they're a step closer to not being responsible for it. And I give you our geologist, Robert Pope.
Thank you, Charles. My name is Robert Pope. I am a geologist. The last 17 years I've been doing expert witness work and litigation support for environmental law cases. Prior to that, I did a lot of consulting for federal government and private landowners and businesses, a lot of Fortune 100 energy companies as well. And in all the history of the work I've done the last 30 years, I've never seen anything as dangerous as what's happening on our beach right now as I speak. And that's the reason I volunteer my time and share this information. So, what do you all see on the slide behind me here? A train wreck, yeah. This is kind of has double meaning for what we're seeing here, because I think we're kind of set up for a train wreck at San Onofre. But this train wreck is actually a train that was bound from Long Beach to Los Angeles in 1933. And this is important for us because this train was a victim of a 6.2 magnitude earthquake in Long Beach. And so was all of Southern California. That earthquake was the largest earthquake we experienced at that time since we invented the seismograph. And when we put seismographs in locations all around Southern California, as earthquakes occurred, we started to see visually where the faults were and started to map these faults. And when the Long Beach earthquake happened, we were able to delineate the Newport-Inglewood fault. It's a fault that runs from Newport Beach through all the way through Inglewood and up into the mountains in Los Angeles County. And what we discovered about the Newport-Inglewood fault is we learned that earthquakes were far more damaging than we previously thought. So we revised our engineering, the way we engineer buildings and infrastructure. This is the Bowers Museum. The Bowers Museum is now in Anaheim because previously this wasn't a fault rupture. This is actually just the bluff material in Long Beach that building was built upon, but the shaking of the earthquake caused the bluffs to fail and the entire building failed. Those bluffs are very similar geologically to the bluffs that we have out here at San Onofre. So it was just a 6.2 magnitude quake. We had a quake 10 times greater in 1971. That was up in the valley, the San Fernando quake. And after that 1971 quake, the people of California spoke up. And what the people of California did was they passed a law that required all of Southern California, or all of California, to be mapped. Every earthquake fault was to be mapped because faults happen in the same place over and over again. When you have a fault, future earthquakes are more likely to move on that fault than other places. And we learned that in geology. Well, here's a little bit more about the 1933 earthquake. You know, there was over 100 people killed by that earthquake, and our population was 1/20th of what it is today. And we had thousands injured. We had fires raging because of our gas utilities. And these are all risks we still face. You know, you guys have probably been Southern California residents for a long time. You understand the risks, but as geologists, we like to look at other places to learn more. You know, geology is a science of observation, and we have a great island in the South Pacific. It's the South Island of New Zealand. And over there, they have very similar strike-slip faults to what we have here in Southern California, but the plates move 10 times more quickly. So we're able to see, kind of fast forward, what our future is going to look like. And back in November of 2016, we had a big earthquake on the South Island, the big red spot there, was a 7.8 magnitude quake. It was more than 10 times greater than the Long Beach earthquake of 1933. And then we had over 2,000 aftershocks. So here's a graph. November 13th of 2016, the 7.8 magnitude quake happened, and then it was followed by 3 quakes that were about the same size as the Long Beach quake. And then we had over 2,200 aftershocks during the next 5 days. And what we learned from observing this quake was that there was movement along 4 faults. And one of those faults didn't exist prior to the earthquake. And that's pretty typical of strike-slip faults. When you have a fault that's greater than a 7 magnitude, we often have movement along more than one fault, and sometimes new faults are revealed. Here's a picture. The red line shows the fault trace of a fault that was already known on the South Island, and the rectangular boxes show a trench that geologists had dug to evaluate that fault. And what happened during that quake, just during the motion of that initial quake, there was a 9-meter slip. So that's about 28 feet of left lateral slip. So if we had the same thing here right now, all of a sudden I'd be way out there in the street, you know, and you guys would be wondering what happened. That was the extent of the fault that occurred there. And like I said, not all these faults happened along places where there were previous faults known. This fault right here, it didn't exist before the quake. You can see there's a house, and we've got a driveway here that went past the house before, but you can see now the house was moved on top of the driveway, and here's the continuation of the driveway. Again, we had like 25 feet of left lateral movement on that. So, you know, you can see what would happen to a house when it's on the middle of a surface rupture. What would happen to a nuclear waste dump if it's on a surface rupture? And you all know how active Southern California is. Scripps Institute was funded by Edison to about, I think, $12 or $13 million to do a study to learn about what's going on offshore from San Onofre. And Scripps lead scientist Neil Driscoll reported that a 7.4 magnitude quake can happen offshore of San Onofre. And we took a look at his numbers. He's using a model. He used 2 different models to calculate this, and the input parameters that he was using could be challenged. A scientist could reasonably put in other input parameters, and other input parameters could give us a greater than 7.4 number. And I don't know if you folks paid attention in the news a week or 2 ago, we had an earthquake offshore of Alaska, and it was a 7.8. And that 7.8 was in a strike-slip fault, very similar to the geology we have offshore here in Southern California. I believe that earthquake told us something, that the 7.4, we challenged Edison and Scripps to give us an opportunity to test drive their model. They've got a big supercomputer over at Scripps, and we wanted to test drive the model with different input parameters and see what the output was. They agreed to let us do it, but then they never let us. Finally, Edison pulled the plug on the invitation completely. So we're concerned that the earthquake can be bigger than 7.4, and that the engineering of the waste dump isn't sufficient to withstand that kind of quake. There's another thing I'm concerned about, and that you can see this is a picture of San Onofre as we see it today. And back in 1975, they started doing the grading work to excavate down the bluffs to build the 2 domes, reactors 2 and 3. And while they were doing that excavation, their contract geologist, it's a company called Fugro Geosciences, fantastic contractor, I've subcontracted work to them. They discovered that not only was there a fault zone that runs through the bedrock directly underneath reactor number 2, there's also evidence of liquefaction where beach sands had come through the bedrock when landslides had occurred, where the bedrock dropped and pivoted toward the ocean. So what they mapped in a map that was never released to the public was a fault zone that's 6 separate fractures. They all run parallel to the Christianitos Fault. And Fugro Geosciences believed that the fault was active as they looked at it. So, like any responsible power company would do, Edison hired another geologist. So that geologist came in, and not only did they look at the faults on site, they also did trenching off into the marine base area. And what that geologist discovered was 6 places where they believed that fault was active. So Edison hired a 3rd geologist, and that geologist looked at those 6 locations and decided other reasons why 4 of them appeared to be active. And then they hired another geologist. And after about 5 years, they had a panel of scientists say the fault's inactive, and that panel of scientists that didn't include anybody from Fugo Geosciences said that there were no other scientists that had information about that fault that would disagree with their opinion. So, and then after that, we had reactor number 2 built right on top of that surface rupture. So, here's a map of Southern California, and you see the red line coming down here along the beach just offshore. That's the Newport-Inglewood Fault. A geologist at USC says the Newport-Inglewood Fault gets more dangerous as you go south because it has lots of fractures, lots of parallel fractures up in Culver City, and then it narrows down to just a few fractures as you go offshore past Long Beach and offshore of Orange County. And we've had very little activity offshore. In fact, Scripps scientists believe that offshore of San Onofre, the fault hasn't moved since the end of the last ice age, so about 11,200 years. They believe it's been without movement. But you can see in the word Inglewood here, the 2 O's just about represent where our reactors are. And the USGS put out a study in 2015 that concluded we are 50% more likely to have a magnitude 8+ earthquake than we previously believed. And this is mostly in part to the fact that the San Andreas Fault hasn't moved. It's about 30 years overdue. And as I said, the Newport-Inglewood Fault gets more dangerous the farther south you go because it moves less often, and so when it does move, it moves with greater force. 7+ magnitude earthquakes reveal unknown faults. That's often the case. And we had a study done in Santa Barbara, a great geologist and professor up at UC Santa Barbara. He was looking at dissolved gases in oil wells in Los Angeles, and he found helium-3 in the dissolved gases. And he found the helium-3 concentrations got greater the closer he got to the Newport-Inglewood Fault. And helium-3 is a stable form of helium down at what geologists call the Mohorovici discontinuity. It's nicknamed the MOHO. Geologists love to use big words they feel special that way. But the MOHO is just the place where the crust of the earth transitions to the mantle of the earth. So it's where rock goes from being solid to being more like jelly or liquid. But down there, helium-3 is stable. And as this geologist recognized that the helium-3 concentrations went from non-detect to detectable and higher concentrations, the closer he got to the Newport-Inglewood Fault, he recognized that the Newport-Inglewood Fault system actually probably extends all the way through the crust of the earth to the Mohorovici discontinuity. And there's another fault that does that here in Southern California. Can you name it? San Andreas Fault, yeah. So we know that Fukushima, they claim that they were engineered for the worst case scenario, and then Mother Nature delivered something that was worse than the worst case scenario. And I believe in our case here, we're not even engineering to the worst case scenario because the data isn't being honestly represented. We've got geological data that has not been honestly represented. So we're not even engineering to the worst case scenario. Dr. Neil Driscoll, he gave a presentation in Oceanside, and the presentation appeared to be sponsored by Edison because Edison executives were there, but he wasn't allowed to answer any questions about San Onofre. So one of the residents asked a great question. She said, if I'm on the beach and I feel an earthquake, what should I do? And he said you should run 10 to 20 meters above sea level and stay there until you're instructed that it's safe. So 10 to 20 meters is what, 33 to 66 feet above sea level? Our nuclear waste has a 15-foot seawall that's crippled by 50 years of weathering and rusting. So the 3.6 million pounds of high-level nuclear waste doesn't have the opportunity to run 33 to 60 feet uphill to protect itself from a tsunami. We have deep concerns, grave dangers here in Southern California with this nuclear waste dump being buried on our beach. And I might add, why is it being buried on the beach? They've got land in the lease area that's 80 feet above sea level. Why not put it 80 feet above sea level? That'll protect us from a big tsunami, right? Well, there's one reason why you put it on the beach where they put it, and that's because that's exactly where Unit 1 was. Unit 1 was the first reactor that was built there in the 1960s. Through the 60s and 70s, there's all kinds of evidence in the record of failures and contamination of the ground beneath Unit 1. And Edison is responsible for cleaning up that property before they return it back to the Navy. And Edison, in their permit to the California Coastal Commission, their application for permit, they acknowledged on pages 30 and 31 of the geologic section that the area they're burying the waste on will be gone in 100 years. It's going to weather away into the ocean due to rising sea level and longshore currents. So they actually are burying this waste on land that they know is so unstable, it's going to be gone. They acknowledge that in the permit. And so really what they're doing, they don't want to spend the money to clean up unit number 1. So they put a waste dump on top of it as like a placeholder. Let's just put this right here for now. And they say, we're going to move the waste before the erosion takes the land away. But do you think they're going to clean up all the contamination from their decades and decades of unfortunate mishaps? I believe not. So we've got a really fragile coastal geology of San Onofre. You see signs like this all the time in the bluff areas. And you saw the picture of the Bowers Museum I shared earlier. And this facility's built right into the bluffs. The bluffs are so fragile, they'll erode away with a big rainstorm. What we have here is photographs. This is 1969, so this is kind of a before photograph. You can see these shadows are the shadows cast by the bluffs along the beach. And then this is a February 1980 photograph. That's a photograph that just immediately followed 16 days of continual rain in after Christmas of '79, leading into the January of 1980. It's the same rainstorms that took out one of our Beatles homes up in the Hollywood Hills. But what it did here is the water runoff coming over those fragile bluff deposits carved a gigantic canyon. And this is standing at the top looking down into the canyon. There were millions of cubic yards of material that were weathered out into the ocean just from this 16-day rain event. And the same type of fragile bedrock that got washed out here is the kind of bedrock that underlies the concrete structures at San Onofre. And you might ask, well, how would that weather out? Well, we've got sea level fluctuation, twice a day. You got the tides rising and lowering, and the groundwater underneath San Onofre does the same thing. It rises and lowers with the tides. And as sea level rises, that rising and lowering of the tides twice a day will increase in elevation. And we've got a scientist that works with us that believes that the elevation of the tides just in the next 20 to 30 years is going to be washing out all the material that's between those cylinders, keeping that waste dump that they just built somewhat stable. Here's an example of what's going on. Back in January of 2016, we had unique tides that came in. We've been seeing a lot of unique weather phenomenon all over the world, but we had these tides that came in and they completely took out the end of the parking lot and the turnaround for the North San Onofre surf area. So here's another view that Nina Babiars took these pictures for us. You can see they got the barricade up, and where you used to be able to drive down and turn around, you would literally fall into the breaking waves. And you can see right in the background there is the San Onofre power plant, and you can see the seawall right here, which is sticking out in an area that's very vulnerable to beach erosion. And there's an additional view. We saw that erosion happen here in 2016. This area right here is where the waste dump is currently in the process of being filled with nuclear fuel. And with global warming issues, our coastal communities are re-engineering their nearshore infrastructure. They're investing millions and millions of dollars in studying and reinforcing their nearshore infrastructure. And while our coastal cities are making this large investment in our future, we're allowing Edison to create the biggest nuclear waste dump in the United States right on the beach. So in summary, we've got earthquake risk, we've got tsunami risk, we've got global warming and erosion risk related to rising sea levels. We've got corrosion and aging risk that I didn't even talk about. We've got a terrorist target risk. This is a very soft and easy dirty bomb terrorist target. And when you consider what Charles mentioned, that a drop of 2 to 3 inches could cause failure of one of these cylinders, and it takes them hours upon hours to move one of these cylinders to its interment location, it's a very vulnerable situation every time they're moving them, and they're moving them today. Is there anywhere that you can think of in the United States that would be less appropriate than what's going on right now? We have solutions, but Edison is forcing their solution first because it makes financial sense to them. We need to stand up as people and force our solution that makes sense to us. So I ask you, you can change the future of San Onofre. You can go to a beach that doesn't look like that, and together we can make the difference. So thank you very much. I'd like to now bring up Nina Babiars to share her part of the presentation.
My name's Nina Babiars, and like Bob, I am a Public Watchdog's board member. And do I need to, oh, thank you. Well, I think that when we're listening, our life experience and our intuition really are the best protections that we have in life. And so I just want to share a little bit of my life experience. In 1979, I was an engineering construction news reporter in Pittsburgh for McGraw-Hill. And I was living there and witnessed both personally and professionally 3 Mile Island meltdown. I'm just curious how many people here in this room remember 3 Mile Island. Well, we can't forget it. Because, I've witnessed it in my lifetime, and we get into these meetings with Edison. They talk about the low risk. I really don't want to hear it because it did happen, it can happen, and we do have a fragile situation here in our community. I work in transportation full-time, and so what I'm doing with Public Watchdogs, I volunteer and any time that I have, because my intuition is telling me that, I should be listening to my life experience. And so when I heard about what was happening at San Onofre, first of all, from a transportation perspective, I really had a hard time believing it, because I said to Charles, well, wait a minute, there's an interstate highway with millions of people, and the second busiest rail corridor in the United States running right past there. How could this possibly be? And, part of the time I worked for McGraw-Hill, I was a government reporter. And I bring that up because when I started questioning, which is kind of hard for a reporter to stop doing, I got into some of these documents, and I realized, like a lot of the work that I had done in the past, all of these documents were written in a language that most people could not understand. They were written in acronyms, and they were using terminology that the people at Edison created, but you and I probably wouldn't understand what they were talking about. But I did that for a living for a while, and so I started breaking down some of those acronyms. Should I speak up, Darren? Thank you. And so I thought it was important to start, breaking down some of the acronyms so I could figure out what the heck they were talking about. And so when I did, it's just one of those situations in life that you can't walk away from. This is a picture that I took because I do work in transportation, alternative fuels for the transit industry. I go up to LA frequently, and I just got into the habit of stopping by San Onofre and walking the beach. And like Bob pointed out, this is kind of difficult to show what's not there anymore. But that was an entire parking lot that was ripped away only by a king tide in one afternoon. I walked off the length of that, and then when I got back home, Charles and I pulled up an aerial view to show, the proximity that Bob pointed out, just how close this is to where they're going to bury the nuclear waste. And so that was only a king tide. And I would like to point out that, like Bob indicated, there was, a 7.9 or whatever up in Alaska. But that caused a tsunami warning for the entire west coast of the United States from Alaska to the border. And just 3 days or 4 days after that, we had a 4.0 at Lake Elsinore, immediately east of San Onofre. This is a picture. This is actually the manufacturer of the cast, the cans that Charles was talking about, Holtec. And so it's a pretty descriptive side view of, you can see where the ocean is here. You can see also the height of the seawall. You can see that it's lower than the tops of those cans. And we're working with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Tom English. And Dr. English was an advisor to President Carter on nuclear issues. And he's currently working on projections of sea level rise, which are, sea level rise studies are being done all up and down the coast. In Del Mar, for example, last year they finished their study. Their recommendation, and I took particular note of this because I work in transportation, was the water's going to be so high in Del Mar, they're recommending to relocate the rail line. So this is something that's relevant to, what we're dealing with in San Onofre, 108 feet from the water. James Hansen is a NASA engineer, and he's projected where the sea is going to be in 2050. And we all know how fast time is moving, so it's really not so far away. But how did we get here? How does this happen that, these events could unfold in the way that they did, and we're left now this week with the burial of this waste beginning? Well, in 2011, what Charles and Bob were talking about, when those generators failed, what that equated to was a radiation leak, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. So let's not forget that it's not just that the generators failed, it's that when they failed, we had a radiation leak. Immediately after that radiation leak, Edison started putting in applications to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for emergency planning exemptions. And I've tracked that paperwork, and I can see, how the documentation went through. And what Edison claimed in their application was, and this is a quote, "The plant is closed and the risk is low." Well, the plant being closed has absolutely nothing to do with the risk of burying nuclear waste. It only had to do with the risk of an operating plant. But that's the language that they used, and they applied for these they applied for these emergency planning exemptions. There was the California Energy Commissioner Chair Weisenmiller that vehemently opposed them, and they were granted anyway. 24 hours after the emergency planning exemptions were granted to Edison, they changed the emergency plan. And I take that very personal because if something does occur, the emergency plan is what our communities are going to be using in order to respond to that emergency. 1 week later, after those emergency planning exemptions were granted and the emergency plan was changed, that's exactly the information that Edison took to the Coastal Commission and said, look, the plant is closed, the risk is low, and it was on that basis that the California Coastal Commission granted Edison the permit to bury the waste. That's how they got the permit. That's how they got the permission to do this. And, you know, I've pretty much covered this, but, you know, when the California Coastal Commission granted Edison that permit, there were some other things that happened. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission then immediately notified FEMA, our Federal Emergency Management Agency, that guess what? The plant is closed and the risk is low. And so if a radiological incident should happen at San Onofre, FEMA is not to respond. And then FEMA notified the regional office of the same, and the regional office of FEMA, the Office of Emergency Services. So right now, if something should occur, Orange County and San Diego County Emergency Services will be our only emergency response. And every layer of funding that went with each of those agencies also went away. I just want you to look at the timeline of what I'm talking about here, because the emergency planning exemptions were granted on June 4th. The emergency plan was changed on June 5th of 2015. On June 11th is when Edison applied to the Coastal Commission and filed that application for that permit to bury the waste. And October 5th of 2015 is when the Coastal Commission granted Edison a permit to bury the waste. And so, you know, I want you to look at it in that order. But the other thing that happened was the Coastal Commission indicated that they had required it, but not for another 20 years. Well, my thinking is, you know, if it's important for all these reasons, then wouldn't it be important the very day that the first can goes in the ground? I think that's just common sense. And this is, again, a slide of Edison's. And I like to use their slides because, you know, these are not our opinion. Everything that we're talking about is on our website. The documentation you can see for yourself. I'd invite you to do that as well. But Edison is giving updates all the time at the quarterly community engagement panels. And this is one of their slides after they were pressed by public watchdogs and a number of other groups about this aging management or monitoring system. Their next update was they're collaborating with industry groups to develop an inspection program. And then they list those that they're collaborating with. Well, guess what? They're collaborating with the manufacturers of the cans. And so, you know, where I come from, they call that, you know, the rooster watching the hen house. So we have a significant situation, and you may ask, well, what can I do? Well, first of all, we're asking you to tell everybody that you know, get this conversation going in our communities. And, you know, pick up the phone. You may ask, you know, why aren't we working with elected officials? We've spent the last 3 years working with our elected officials and their staffs, et cetera, bringing this to their attention. So I only have one question, you know, why aren't any of our elected officials stepping out in a leadership role here? I think that's a legitimate question. And the only answer I can come up with, maybe you can come up with another one, I don't know. There's a lot of power and money involved here. And I question whether our elected officials' objectivity has been compromised by campaign contributions, because otherwise, why aren't they stepping out with regard to the personal safety of their own constituents? And I think that's a legitimate question. So the reason we're here today is because we've decided to go directly to the people and to get as much information out to as many people as we possibly can. And so I'd invite you to do one in all of those things. We do need your support because, as you can well imagine, this is opposition to this message has been rather fierce. But, you know, we have a resource right here in this room, and his name is Gary Hedrick. And I'm going to introduce Gary with San Clemente Green, who can talk about what you can do right here in San Clemente.
Wow, what a great presentation. Think about how grateful I am to be with you, and I feel emotional just because the people that have come here and shared this story with you, it's so convincing, and it's so undeniably true. You just wonder, what are we going to do about this? And it's so wonderful that they're here with us, volunteering their time, trying to do what's right, and making sure that people know about the real danger. And that's probably been the most powerful experience for me personally, being approached by people who are working at the power plant, putting their careers on the line to let us know that the steam generators were going to fail. They needed to be tested properly, and they weren't being done. And no one would listen to us. And finally, the steam generators gave away, and that's a horrible way to be proven right, but fortunately it stopped before it became a real nuclear disaster. But we're still dealing with those same people, and yet the burden that I felt because whistleblowers came and shared that information with me is hard to turn your back on. And that's why Nina and Charles and Bob, everyone that is touched by this truth, feels an obligation to continue to spread the word around. And, you know, I just feel like taking a breath here and being thankful for people like you've heard today, and for the whistleblowers, and even the people who are today working to protect us, to handle that nuclear waste as best they can. You know, let's have a moment of gratitude for them and hope they do okay. Because the consequences are so bad. And they're at so much risk too. So, with that gratitude in my heart, and for you for being here, I just want you to know that it's not the end of the world by any means. What happened in the shutdown was that people rose up. They started understanding. They started informing each other about this stuff. And the problem at this level is now where we have to go to the federal level and really make them hear us. So thanks to Lori Donchuk, our city councilwoman, and now we're going to be putting a letter together from our city to go directly to Kamala Harris, our U.S. Senator, and say, you got to come look at this. You have to understand what we're dealing with, why we're so concerned. But until the people closest to the problem really act concerned in a rational manner, they're not going to listen to us. And this is really that level of government problem, because they didn't provide a permanent place for the nuclear waste. And we have to hold them accountable and say, look, it's your responsibility. If something goes wrong here, you got to compensate us for our health, our property, everything else. This is your fault if something goes wrong. But we don't want to blame fault. We want to prevent the accident in the first place. So I've got a stack of postcards for each person who's moved by the presentation they've heard today. Take those cards and, you know, just go to your neighbors, hand them to them. Just start a conversation, or leave them on the car if you're not willing to have a conversation with someone. Or if there's a business or a store or someone that would put those things on the countertop, do it, because that's where it starts. You never know what person is going to pick up that card and read that we have a serious problem here. And it's not just about sending a card to Kamala Harris. It's like, there's some factual information in there, why we should be concerned. And you're empowering them with a postcard to reach out and be heard. So it's kind of our responsibility, now that we know the truth, to take it to as far as we can. And I hope you'll take advantage. We try to make it really easy. One side of the postcard's got the specific request we have for Kamala Harris to come here and see the problem in person, listen to the concerned citizens. And then there's the back side where there's plenty of space for you to make your own comments and make sure that she hears that you're concerned. And, in the meantime, you'll have shared that postcard, hopefully take more than one for yourself, and share it with other people, because you never know where that's going to go. It's like listening to the sound and the vibration today. It's like, that was a journey for me. And we're on a journey together now, too. And we're all part of that vibration. We just got to keep ringing it out. And, maybe it's going to take a gong. Maybe that's what we need to be. Maybe we need to be a gong before it's too late. So I hope you'll all join us in that effort. And thanks again for being here, and let me say a few words.
Thanks, Gary. And Charles, Bob, if you could come up, I think people might have some questions that they'd like to answer, and like to take questions now.
I have a question.
Yeah, by the way, I just want to say the bathrooms are right around the corner. If anybody, this has been a very long presentation. We're so grateful to you for, for holding your questions. And you had a question?
Yeah, my question
Basically. Microphone, so everybody at home can hear you, and everybody back here can hear you.
And read the billboards on the way back from the bathroom.
My question is, where does the Coastal Commission get their authority? It seems to me that the DOE should be the people that we should be talking to, as far as getting rid of the waste or finding a good place to put it, at least for the time being. Putting it on the ocean is probably the worst thing they can do. Secondary to that is about, in a couple of years, the same thing's going to be happening up at Diablo. So.
Yeah, where the Coastal Commission's mission statement is to protect our coastline for present and future generations. And it's beyond us why they would allow a nuclear waste dump 108 feet from the beach. And we think we know it's because the governor ordered them to make it happen. And because they had no business doing it. And what our lawsuit says is they have absolutely zero authority to issue nuclear waste permits. And did you have something to add, Bob?
Well, I'd like to point out that we have quite a bit of information on the table, and part of your question, Pete, is addressed in some of that information. Yeah, I mean, the arrogance that we're talking about here is just astounding. The California Coastal Commission was warned by the Navy from Pendleton 4 days before they granted that permit, in writing, in a 2-page letter with legal precedent-setting examples, that the Coastal Commission didn't have the jurisdiction nor the authority to grant that permit. And they turned around 4 or 5 days later and granted it anyway. I mean, they shined off the U.S. Navy. And so that's one of the reasons we filed this federal lawsuit, is, accountability, like Gary was talking about, but to point out that the Coastal Commission's permit, they did not have the authority to grant it.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing. There's this distinction between state lands and federal lands, and these are Navy lands, and a 1963 act of Congress gave the Navy the authority to lease this land to Edison. So federal laws apply on that facility, not state laws. And you can see a clear example of that. Back in December 22nd, 1972, the California people got a law enacted that causes us to have to map every surface rupture of faults all throughout Southern California. But when you look at those maps, there's no faults mapped for Camp Pendleton or for the San Onofre nuclear power plant. So you can see from that map alone that state law does not apply on that piece of property that the power plant is on. So to have a state agency pretend that they have the authority to issue a permit is absurd. Only federal law applies to those federal lands that San Onofre is on. And I say, if somehow state law is applying now, let's get the Alquist Priolo maps on there, and let's see the fault that goes right through reactor number 2. You couldn't build a house within 50 feet of that if that was anywhere else in the state.
We have a question over here.
Hi, my name is Dan. I have 3 people that came with me. I saw you guys at Augustino's about a month or so ago, and I said, well, why don't you put this stuff on the internet? Why don't you put it on Facebook? Why don't you, people, when they see this, they're gonna react, they're gonna respond. And you said, well, they just don't. And I'm not sure why they don't, but I was only able to get 3 people here that live in our community that will listen to me, only 3. And, you know, these are not nice people we're dealing with here. They are not nice people. They don't give a shit, excuse me. They don't care. My wife reprimanded me because I said something bad at Augustino's. This really upsets me. And, you know, I'm thinking we all take about 10 or 15 Priuses and line them up across the 5 freeway right in front of this piece of crap and stop traffic. And that will get some people's attention. We keep the traffic stopped and we say, look, this is a permanent thing if this thing leaks. And then let you guys do your 5-minute elevator pitch. Because this is insanity.
I would like to point out that we do have a lot of information on our website, and I try to keep up with Facebook, but, you know, we're human beings too, and we need more people. Pardon me?
We're streaming this live to YouTube, so if you got friends when you get home
Yeah.
and want to watch this, you can watch it.
Thank you, Terry. I have another question. We have another question.
Hi, my name is Nicole, and I'm wondering is anyone thought about partnering with the NRDC, National Resources Defense Council? Because they're full of attorneys and they fight for the environment.
Yes.
Yeah, the NRDC is a national nuclear group, and those national groups are really working to shut down nuclear reactors because they believe they're terribly dangerous. And once they do that, they really declare victory and sort of walk away. Now, the NRDC has said the best thing we can do is store the nuclear waste near the reactors where the nuclear waste was generated because we don't have a safe storage place. And the problem is that, and they agree with us on this, the NRDC, this is the worst possible place to store it anywhere in the world. But we're really kind of on our own out here because the NRDC is more focused on shutting them down than worrying about the waste. And I think what's going to happen now is a transformation of consciousness in America, and this is what we're trying to do, is raise awareness about the fact that the nuclear waste is the real problem. The half-life on uranium is what, 4 million years, Bob? That means it's half as deadly after 4 million years as it is today.
We have another question or comment here and then one across the room. I would just like to interject something that, you know, what we're talking about here is not just a little local regional problem. Let's face it, if Edison gets away with doing this on one of the most pristine beaches in the world in the middle of millions of people on an earthquake fault in a tsunami zone, they're going to do this anywhere that they want to across the country. And this is a dying industry. We've got 104 of these across the country, and I believe something like 14 that are in decommissioning status like Charles is just talking about. And so if this is going to be a precedent setting of what's happening here in our community. So this is a national consequence. And so when you talk to people about this issue, frame it up in that way, because that's exactly what it is. Gene? Oh,
yeah. As a founder of Residents Organized for a Safe Environment and being on the CEP for the first year, it was, I'd like to just go over a couple of things. The California Edison, when they talked me into being on the CEP, they promised that they were going to do the state-of-the-art decommissioning, which turned out to be not true, and it was the cheapest sort of thing that they could do and get away with by the NRC regulations. I want to congratulate you on your lawsuit because the point is well taken, and we argued that at the CEP, that the state has no authority over this land because it's federal land. But the other thing, nuclear power is based on defense in depth. And during the first year of the CEP, I repeatedly and continuously said at almost every meeting that why isn't there defense in depth with nuclear waste. To have defense in depth, there's only two things you can do. You can either put it in a fuel pool, if there's a problem, put it back immediately, but there's not going to be any big crane, there's not going to be any fuel pool, so that's out. There's also another thing that's called a hot box. It costs $500 million to build one. There's not one in the state. There's no safety reality that can happen quickly. So if there is an accident, the likelihood that they get a Navy ship and go dump it in our ocean is really the only solution that they may have to stop nuclear radiation. So we need to be asking for defense in depth, which is the same principle that nuclear power is built on for nuclear waste. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gene. I would like to point out at the most recent CEP meetings, which Public Watchdogs likes to call the Community Enragement Panel meetings, that David Victor has quoted you as, and they're using that term for what they're doing now, defense in depth. That's what they're calling it. I'm not sure that it's...
But it's not happening, that's my point.
Exactly, but I just want to bring to your attention that he's actually quoting you with that term, but that's not what exactly.
Well, that's not my term. Defense in depth is the nuclear.
I know, he's attributed it to you. I just wanted to make you aware of that and
Is he
not...
blaming me for the nuclear waste?
Not yet, not yet. I think this gentleman over here had a question or a comment.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for being here, guys. My name is Bobby Davis. I'm a resident. I got my daughters and my granddaughters live here. My grandson. So, grandsons. I've been trying to. My family lives here. Got grandkids here. This obviously concerns me. I've been trying to find out information about this for the last year. Doing Google searches, and all I could find was the San Diego Tribune did articles occasionally, which were, as best I could find. I'm glad to know more about this. But I wanted to clear up a couple things you guys said. One, first of all, you mentioned that they're moving them today.
Wednesday, they started Wednesday
Okay,
morning.
and you said this thing weighed like one of those canisters weighs 100,000 pounds? So they're moving 100,000 pound canisters today, that if it drops an inch or so, it could fracture. So this is happening now. I just wanted to clarify. So that's kind of intense right there. You also, when did I just want to clarify, when did the Coastal Commission grant the permit? What year?
October 6, 2015.
Okay, so that was Governor Brown. Now, Governor Brown, you mentioned it had to get his approval. Is that correct? He was the guy, he expedited it?
He's expedited things in a number of different ways.
On this specific?
In this specific burial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
With the
So-
corruption of the California Public Utility Commission. I'd like to point out something that Gene said. Yeah, they're not only doing this on the cheap, but they're doing it on the cheap with our money. So.
And then one last thing, you mentioned something that this is federal land that we're dealing with, so it's a federal problem now. But then we have a state that approved it.
And that's why we filed a federal law.
Okay. I just trying to clarify stuff. I really thanks for your information, guys. This is more serious. Thank you.
Well, and, we tried to cover a lot of ground. There's even more information and more detail. And I would like to point out that, we have filed a federal lawsuit. We are needing support, financial support for this legal battle that we're facing. We have had someone to come to us to help with fundraising, which we need to do this. And we are doing presentations in private homes so that you can pull your family and your friends together in small groups to do that. So I just want to mention, get you thinking about that. If you're interested, you can take a card or take a newsletter on our table there and call us to do that. We're doing these anywhere, anytime.
I have a couple questions, kind of based on what you said, but with the weight of all the canisters once they're in, it makes me think of like the building in San Francisco that's sinking? Like, wouldn't it just kind of start to fall apart immediately? And when would that project be finished? When will all the canisters be completely put into the ground?
It may take a year and a half to actually get them all in the ground, but yeah, they are. It is loading a lot of mass on land that's already failed historically, or based on the trenching and the maps that Fugro Geosciences provided in 1975. So yeah, that's a concern of mine as well, that the structure could actually move and potentially break under its own weight.
And, you know, got a lot of well-educated engineers down there, but as my mom used to say, it doesn't look like anybody went to the College of Common Sense. Any questions?
Question way in the back, right, left row.
So my question was similar to the first question, but why did the Coastal Commission approve it?
Because they could. They thought they could. I mean, they did it because they were enabled with political power to do it. It doesn't mean that they have the authority, the legal authority to do it, which is what we're fighting. They did not have the legal authority to do it. They did it because they had the arrogance to do it. And there's no accountability. I mean, that is what we're talking about here.
I believe their reasoning was that they don't have any knowledge on how nuclear waste works or the risks associated with it. So if the Nuclear Regulatory Commission believed it was a good idea, they would approve it.
Do we have some more questions?
I'm in the back row.
Hi, I'm wondering, where is KSUI and all these corporate stations that they seem to reach a lot of people, and they have an investigative team that can help people if you buy a bad refrigerator, but where are they now?
Well, KUSI, Charles has been interviewed.
Or any of them.
Well, KUSI has not been about the only station that's covering it, and I think Charles has a CBS.
If you go and click on the little YouTube icon on our website, you'll see a couple of really great stories from KUSI. They're the only TV station that's really willing to stick it to SDG&E in Southern California, Edison locally in San Diego. Now, well, it's just
Well, call the media. I mean, they're on the list too. I mean, call them and say, why are you not covering this? Call them. You know, we were interviewed last week. Charles, if you could address the CBS thing coming up.
There will be a CBS report on Monday night talking about the movement of the casks. That's KFMB in San Diego. You know, part of the problem is that Orange County is a bit of a media desert. You know, you're stuck between LA and San Diego, and you've only got your local newspapers, which do a pretty good job, but they don't want to offend local advertisers, and neither do these TV stations. Another aspect of it is for it to be news, we have to come up with something new all the time about San Onofre. You don't just run a report on, yeah, it's still out there and it's still really, really dangerous. You know, it's kind of hard to sell that to a news producer. Michael, you had a question.
I'm just wondering, are there nuclear fallout shelters around with food?
The best one is your home, actually. The best advice in the event there was a major release is to shelter in place, stay under a thick roof. Even a sheet of newspaper, if you have to go out to your car, is better than nothing in terms of protecting yourself from radiation.
Also, I'm wondering, would it be possible to move all nuclear stuff into a place where there's not much life, like has anybody scouted out a better alternative, like Death Valley maybe? Or
well, that's part of the problem. I mean, you're talking about transporting it across state lines, and no other state really wants to take this. But, you know, moving it through, so that those issues have been addressed, but no one's come up with an answer. And the other thing I want to interject is that, you know, we don't have all the answers, but one thing that we do know is that everything that has been determined to date has been behind closed doors and in secret, and only by Edison.
I've got one more thing to add on that. The U.S. Navy is a federal government agency, obviously. They move their nuclear waste across state lines all the time. Their temporary storage facility is in Idaho. It's not a perfect answer, but it's a demonstration that we already do move this waste across state lines. We just don't do it with private companies.
Oh, Gene, we have someone here that has a question.
I was just wondering, how far along are you with the lawsuit, and in reality, do you think it's a good shot, or?
We think it's a great shot, and we've got more lawsuits in the work. The only issue right now is funding. So we could really use your help. We're a tax-deductible 501c3 nonprofit. So we'd love to talk to you about adopting a lawsuit if you're interested in doing that. I also want to mention we only have about 6 minutes left before we have to wrap this up. So
Just a couple of things. We do have an April 5th court date, do we not?
yes.
And we did receive response from both Southern California Edison as well as the Department of Defense that we're in the process of reviewing to prepare for that April 5th date. And I would also like to reiterate what Bob said. You know, we have had a retired Navy admiral has said, you know, why aren't they engaging us? We've been doing this successfully and safely, moving nuclear waste to Idaho, like Bob said, for 40 years, and that's part of the problem. They haven't brought all the creative strategies and the experience to the table. They've only engaged their own opinion.
I agree with the fellow over here who was talking about when they're moving the canisters, and what if a canister drops? And that was kind of a heart-stopping moment. And I wonder if you could describe to us what we would be doing right now if a canister dropped an hour ago. What would it be like?
I would like to address that because I was in Pittsburgh during 3 Mile Island, and it is not like our fires. You can't see it, you can't smell it. And when we woke up with that situation like you're talking about, there was a lot of uncertainty about what to do, where to go. And so those questions have not been answered. And that's one of the reasons I focused on this emergency planning and emergency preparedness. Edison not only got exemptions for emergency planning, but just at the beginning of January, on January 5th and again on January 10th, they got massive exemptions for both their on-site and their off-site, and off-site is you and me, insurance. And we know that they had the green light to start burying this stuff in the last quarter of 2017 because they told us that in a November meeting. So why did they wait until this past Wednesday to start burying it when they could have buried it last month? Is because they were waiting for insurance exemptions that took off-site from $560 million down to $100 million. So that says to me they knew that there was risk and they wanted to absolve themselves of liability.
And one thing I might add is that in the past, when Edison's had failures, we didn't know when the failure happened until we learned about it weeks or months later. So I believe if a cylinder was dropped and cracked, there's no public eyes on it seeing what's going on. They've got armed guards preventing us from getting anywhere close to it. It'll be weeks or months, if ever, we know that something happened.
I can answer this question. First of all, if you remember, we had a nuclear symposium here several years ago, and we brought one of the top physicists in transportation of hazardous material, Marvin Resnicoff. So these, having talked to Mr. Singh of Holtec, these canisters will, the reason they're being moved only 2 or 3 inches above ground, because they will take a drop, and supposedly without damage in the canisters. But damage to the canisters, that's when we'll have a leak. But what they're not telling you is that these fuel rods are very, very brittle. And I haven't heard the word used of how many canisters or the type of fuel rods we have left. We have high burn-up fuel, which is twice as radioactive and twice as hot as the original fuel rods were here. So if one of these fuel rods crack and break apart, basically that canister could never be opened because it's going to immediately hit the air and have a serious problem. So, in the Navy cast, I wanted to say something about, when Don and I were first researching about the cast and which cast was better, we both met with Mr. Singh. We found it very difficult to discover information about the Navy canisters. We got what was legal to get a hold of. We're not hackers, so we couldn't get any further. But we did discover that the Navy canister has far fewer, which is why they don't want to use them. But they are far safer because they're 8 inches thick and they're transportable, which our canisters are not. And any nuclear waste should be in a transportable.
We do have another question down here. We do have another question. Yeah, that's true, and they do cost more, and that's the point too. You know, they're doing everything on the cheap.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Freddie Avalos, and I want to just, this gentleman here, I want to strongly agree and support your idea about direct nonviolent action, because we have to make it inconvenient for people to make them listen. And so I don't know how much experience many of you have with direct nonviolent action. So just a couple of things I'd like to shout out. One is a wonderful book called A Beautiful Trouble that gives you a very extensive, brief, but very powerful education on direct nonviolent action, such as using your card to block off the streets. And then the other thing I'd like to say to you is there on freepress.net, there is a media reform action guide that gives you all sorts of information about how you can go into and should go into local news broadcasting offices and demand that this story be told. So.
Charles, you want to close on
Yeah, I would like to, I'm sorry, we can talk afterwards, but we have to end the formal part of this presentation. And I want to thank Darren McClure for making this happen. I want to thank Dr. Heather Clark for allowing us to use this sacred space for such an important issue. I want to thank Pantera for organizing this event and getting the word out. And I want to thank Lynn Marillac for the sound healing, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to attend. We know there's more fun ways to spend a Saturday afternoon, and what we're really working toward is we want to recruit people who are willing to make presentations like this, and we want to recruit what we call conscious or sacred activists who are willing to engage in nonviolent demonstrations that are peaceful and ways of raising awareness. Our biggest problem still is that people are not aware that we even have a problem. Thank you so much.
We'll take Bitcoin, Edison stock.
It was really nice meeting you. Thank you, Linda. Where did this come from? It was given to me by a teacher of mine when I Okay. Does it have a meaning?
Hello. Hello. Hey, I wanted to invite everybody back on Sundays. If you enjoyed the metaphysical aspect of what was going on here, no matter what path you are on in your spiritual journey, you are welcome here with us. Sundays, meditation at 10, service starts at 10:30. Be here.
Hey, well, that's very interesting. Thank you. Yeah, so, you know, it's been my neighbor for 25 years. And pretty well. Well, you know, when your parents name you, like, yeah, let's call her Linda. You know, right? You know, I mean, well, I don't know. Whether it's north of the equator, Yeah, I can see that. It was very nice meeting you. Very nice meeting you. Me too.
I've never seen
I had a friend of mine
LA.
Yeah, well, they having their microphone helped a lot too.
High elevation.
I'm gonna head out. It's nice meeting you. Take care.
You can endure all day long. It's not like
Yeah, it's,
powder poison.
yeah, it's like the natural, just a herbal remedy, basically.
Oh, and it gives you endurance. You can really go all day. And you can buy tea too.
Thanks for putting this on. We gotta do something. Our pad and I have.